Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Xavier Duran. I am the Adult Programming Coordinator for the Lyle Library District. A couple of things before we begin, because of Zoom and the nature of electronics, if we have any type of technical difficulties, just give us a couple of minutes as we try to kind of troubleshoot what the problem is, and resume the presentation that way. During the presentation, you're more than welcome to ask your questions in either the Q&A box or in the chat. Those will be held until the end of the program. We will have time at the end of the program for question and answer. And with that said, let me go ahead and introduce our wonderful presenter. Dr. Theodore Darden has been a professor of justice studies since 2006 at the College of DuPage in Glen Ellen, Illinois. He has served as chair of the department from 2009 to 2013. Prior to working in academia, he has been a law enforcement professional for 17 years, where he's obtained the rank of patrol sergeant. Darden was instrumental in bringing community policing to the forefront in the state of Wisconsin. His success in lowering crime rates, building community trust, partnerships, and addressing homelessness gained him statewide recognition when he was named law enforcement officer of the year by the Attorney General's Office of the State of Wisconsin. Dr. Darden has worked with criminal justice experts, agencies, and communities across the globe, including the late Herman Goldstein, whom he considered a mentor. He has provided lectures, presentations, and training exercises in numerous areas. The list goes on and on with the number of incredible accomplishments and accolades from our presenter. So please, everyone, welcome Dr. Theodore Darden.
Thank you, Javier, and welcome everybody. I'd just like to start the program with a montage that I'd like for you to just take a moment and just think about this as we prepare for what we're going to do here. Okay, hopefully everybody has had enough time to take in this last quote that I provided for that intro. And welcome to my presentation about the Black Panther Party. My presentation is going to be wrapped around some historic foundation of the Black Panther Party. It's probably one of the most misrepresented and misunderstood group of social justice advocates in the United States. And it's not a surprise why that is as I go through this presentation and talk to you about it. But I'm going to start with some historical backgrounds of what led up to the creation of this group, and then follow through some of its members. And although I only have about the next 40 minutes or so to give you that information, I could probably spend at least 1 to 2 hours talking about any of these individuals that you will see who were really some major players in this group. Of course, there's some controversies surrounding the group. There's some things that were committed by some of their members, and other things that were committed against them by the United States government, by law enforcement personnel. So I probably won't be able to go into all the depth and details, but I will give you enough of the foundational points that if you are really interested in knowing about a piece of history that I think this generation should be aware of, it's this group, because there's a lot of similarities between what's going on with the Black Lives Matters movement and what the Black Panther Party was really trying to work through in the 1960s. If you think about the 1960s in this country, that was the decade in which I was born, and so I was young, but as a scholar and researching these things, these pictures that you see were unfortunately commonplace in the 1960s, 1950s, and the late 1960s even. And with civil unrest in terms of people fighting for their civil rights and the civil rights of others, with a pushback by representatives in the government and in the community, all of these conflicts kind of like began to boil over. And this would lead to people questioning, what are we doing? You had peaceful protesters and civil rights marchers led by Dr. Martin Luther King. And for some people, in particular young people, it just felt like no progress was being made. Still had poor housing, couldn't find jobs, looked to themselves to say, how do we provide access to education and things like that for ourselves and our children? And then when you think about all the assassinations, of civil rights advocates or civil rights leaders, and people watching this, the assassination of Medgar Evers and John F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, Robert F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King in the 1960s, it seems like there was no progress being made, even with people being peaceful in terms of asking for human beings to be treated decently and given rights in terms of voters' rights and access to those things that I mentioned before: housing, education, nutrition, good jobs, and so on and so forth. And those were the concerns, the inequalities, in particular that Negroes could not find. Black people couldn't find jobs. They had moved to the North to escape, the racist South and people, being hanged in the South. And so the Great Migration in the early 20th century and in full swing into the 1960s, Jim Crow laws, separate but equal, that had been established with Plessy versus Ferguson, and all of these other concerns. This is directly what led to Huey Newton and Bobby Seale of coming up with this ideal, to create this Black Panther Party. They were frustrated about the lack of progress, for Blacks, white repression and police violence, against Blacks. They were convinced the peaceful protest of MLK just was not working, and that there needed to be other steps taken. And they looked at themselves as protectors, the Black Panther Party as protectors to stand up, against police violence, against Blacks and other things. They had this 10-point plan that they came up with. And as you can see there, some of those 10-point plans were in direct relations to that previous slide that I had showed you about all of those things that they were concerned about. They wanted freedom. They wanted the power to determine what their own destiny would be in terms of the Black community. Employment. They wanted to end this, what they call this robbery by the capitalist system that just did not work for the Black community. Decent housing, education, a number of things. Black men to be exempt from military service. The Vietnam War certainly wasn't in favor of that. You send us off to war, but we don't get treated fairly in our own country, that sort of thing. Of course, the police brutality. They wanted Black men to be freed from federal, state prisons and jails because many of them they felt were being held, for reasons that they should not be imprisoned. And so they wanted all of these things. And this is what their original 10-point plan looked like. And so when Seale and Newton had met in college and came up with this ideal and started the Black Panther Party in October of 1966, it was with the ideal of protecting the Black community and trying to further the Black community's interests, because this peaceful marching, wasn't getting it done. nothing was happening. Other people in that movement would come along and also play a role. The Black Panthers provided a lot of community service. They were about community service. They almost evolved from the very beginning, from their stance to say we are the protectors to their stance to say we are the providers. We want to help people, in our community, getting business owners to donate grocery and things of that nature, for free breakfast programs and lunch and providing access for people to come in and learn about economics and certain things, of that nature. Also, a free health clinics. They did things like this. And as you saw Black Panther parties cropping up in other cities around the country, these things began to take root and take hold, and they were very important. They were very important things that the Black Panthers actually were involved in. And so free medical clinics, in terms of classes on politics and economics, trying to give people some hope, some background, some support, so they can move forward as a community, taking care of their own. Many of these donations, that you see, they were donated, by the white communities, these white business owners, who also felt that these things were necessary, and they supported things like this. And so this was more than a coalition. This was more than just Black people that were involved in some of these ideas. There was a number of people from other races and socioeconomic groups that were involved in this. Eldridge Cleaver was another main player in the Black Panther movement. I've outlined some things about Cleaver. He was inspired while he was in prison by the words of Malcolm X. He began to write his own essays and ended up actually publishing a book that was titled Soul on Ice, that was heralded about his story. And then when he was paroled, he met Seal and Newton, and he joined the Black Panther Party and eventually became the Minister of Information. Some of the other things, he fled the U.S., that should say in 1968, to escape prosecution for a shootout with the Oakland Police Department after the assassination of Martin Luther King. And so when he did that, he fled to other countries, and he would return eventually back in 1975 after the murder charges were dropped, and he pled guilty to a lesser charge of assault and was sentenced to 5 years probation. But Eldridge Cleaver, had a mighty voice within the Black Panther Party. He left that party in 1971 while he was still a fugitive from justice, because he had philosophical differences with where he felt like the party was going and where it should be going. And you found a lot of that infighting in the Black Panther Party. And some of that could have been very well caused by other people who had infiltrated the party and caused some of the concerns that the party had. Stokely Carmichael was an important piece of the Black Panther Party. Stokely Carmichael was an educated young man. He was going to Howard University, had become a leader in the Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, the Freedom Riders. Many people have heard about the Freedom Riders with the work of John Lewis, and with his death, the Freedom Riders got a lot of press during that time. But Stokely Carmichael was a leader in the SNCC program and with the Freedom Riders. He joined the Black Panther Party in 1967 after he became frustrated, as many young people were, in terms of what was happening. He didn't feel the nonviolent movement was actually getting anything done, and that was one of the things that moved him towards the Black Panther Party. He coined the term Black Power, and that term was coined because he felt, that Blacks should unite. and come together and in a united front, that they would be more powerful, and they could get more done and demand more for themselves, for their community, and for the next generation that was coming up. Carmichael would eventually quit the Black Panthers in 1969. He ended up moving away to Guinea in Africa because he said America, does not belong to blacks. He just had enough, and he moved away and he changed his name to Kwame Ture. And he did work over there in terms of Africa with other communities and other countries in terms of social justice in other places. Kathleen Cleaver, she was ended up marrying Eldridge Cleaver. She met Eldridge Cleaver while she was in SNCC, and she ended up following him to California. They ended up being married, but she would play a prominent role. She was the first woman to become a highly visible leader in the Black Panther Party. And there were many women. As a matter of fact, there's research that has been looked upon, and it was found that there were probably more female members of the Black Panther Party than male members. And so females played a very important role in the Black Panther Party. She served as the communications secretary from 1967 to 1971. And she fought vigorously against the propaganda that was being spread by the media and the FBI. And that's very important. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the FBI and about local police and their role, and the media and their role in terms of really putting out this propaganda against the Black Panthers and making them look like this highly militant, aggressive, violent group. And that's what they were seen as. In 1967, Bobby Seale and Huey Newton actually went to the Capitol in California, and Ronald Reagan, who was the governor of California then, was actually doing a program with some students, some young students, and the Black Panthers were actually marching on the Capitol with their firearms and talking about the Second Amendment rights. They actually are some of the first groups of people in terms of the modern era in 1967 that were talking about Second Amendment rights, and that they had the right to arm themselves and to carry their firearms. And that was a scene, that the newspapers really, use against the Black Panthers in making them look really militant and really dangerous, with that protest at the Capitol and Ronald Reagan out there with those young students. But this is what Kathleen Cleaver, in terms of being the communications secretary, was up against, is fighting that propaganda that was in the media, trying to bring this positive light and get the word out throughout the country and other cities and other places that the Black Panthers were a legitimate group, just fighting for social justice, just doing a little bit differently than the civil rights protest of Martin Luther King and those peaceful protests where people saw it that way. They were a little bit more vocal, a little bit more out front in terms of how they were going to protect themselves. And think about how that presented itself in the media and on television, in white suburbs and in white households, and what that looked like and how that was being presented with these brown people and Black people, in their berets and in their leather jackets and with their fists, in the air and speaking very emotionally, but yet intelligently about the plight of their community and the plight of their people. That wasn't playing very well in terms of the way that it was being presented to the audience on television that it was intended for. Elaine Brown was another of those Black women in the Black Panther Party who played a very important role. She joined the Black Panther Party in 1968. She was the organizer of their community breakfast program and got things off the ground in Los Angeles, where she had come from before she had went to Northern California. She became the leader actually of the Black Panthers from 1974 to 1977, when Huey Newton actually fled to Cuba to avoid murder charges. And so when he fled to Cuba, she was actually put in charge and led that group. She founded the Black Panther Liberation School. And that school was recognized by the state of California, as a gold standard, for education. And that was one of those things that people don't hear about, that, they started schools in their communities. These schools were very successful. The students in those schools, were learning, were graduating and moving through. She left the party in 1977 when Newton returned. And partially, she indicated that it was because Huey Newton had ordered the beating of a female Black Panther. And the philosophical differences, along with things like that, Elaine Brown ended up leaving the Black Panther Party. But her mark was made, and she did some important work. Another note about Elaine Brown is that she actually led the campaign in which the first Black mayor, Lionel Wilson of Oakland, California, was elected. She was his campaign manager and helped get him elected in 1977. And so she really played a prominent role, and still today she can be found doing some things in terms of social justice. Afeni Shakur, if you recognize that name, Shakur, that's because Afeni Shakur is actually Tupac Shakur's mother, and she actually was in charge and wrote newsletters for the Black Panther Party. She was arrested, spent 2 years locked up in terms of being charged with a conspiracy to bomb a police station. She was pregnant with Tupac, at that time that she was locked up. And some of you may be familiar with the song Dear Mama. And that song is actually paying homage to his mother. And he actually talks about that she was young and she was pregnant, and when she was locked up, with him. And he talked about that. She left the Black Panther Party after she was acquitted of those charges. Angela Davis, many people know Angela Davis, the scholar, in terms of her work there. She was actually working at UCLA, I believe, when she actually became a member of the Black Panther Party. And she had always studied communism and things like that, and that leaning, and she was following along that path. The people that she worked with thought that she was too controversial. They ended up actually firing Angela Davis at UCLA for that. She filed a lawsuit and actually won that lawsuit to get her job back. But she got her job back. She won that lawsuit, but she ended up leaving anyway. She was a member of SNCC as well, a very prominent figure in the Civil Rights Act, gave many speeches in many places. She was actually charged in 1972 with kidnapping and the murder of a federal judge that was in a case that involved the Soledad brothers. And in that case, these gentlemen had ended up in court, and they took hostages. They took the judge. They took some jury members and other people. They ended up in a shootout with the police, and the judge ended up being killed. Angela Davis was said to have actually supplied the firearms for that activity, and that's why she was charged. She ended up actually being acquitted of those charges once she had fled, and once she was found and taken into custody and went to court, she was actually acquitted of those charges. H. Rap Brown, another figure, a very loud voice, a very moving voice, could incite a crowd and move a crowd. He was a part of SNCC. He was the Black Panthers Minister of Information for a while, and he actually has a federal act that was named after him called the Rap Brown Law, the Civil Obedience Act. And what that act actually is, it has a part in that act that says that the ideal that if one person crosses state lines with the intent to participate in mischief is dangerous, and so it became the H. Rap Brown Act. So if you think about that, what they're trying to do is keep people from getting together, from coming together. So if you think about the Black Lives Movement today and somebody traveling across a state line to walk in protest, with another group in terms of social justice movement, that law could have been used against them erroneously by law enforcement to take them into custody to say, well, you cross state lines to create mischief. And once you do that, that's a federal law. So now the feds can step in and make arrests and try to dismantle your group. And they did that a lot. H. Rap Brown was actually incarcerated in 2002 for the killing of a Georgia law enforcement officer. Fred Hampton, many people know his story, especially, of course, here in Chicago. Movies, have been made and are being made. One is actually being released soon. But Fred Hampton was a very, very important figure, not only for the Black Panther Party, but for a number of things that came out of him. Well-spoken, very young, he was a great orator, could get people to follow him. He created the Rainbow Coalition. So when you hear about the Rainbow Coalition, this is something that he's credited with coming up with. He actually had partnered with many groups and got other groups to see the cause, not only of the Black Panther, but their cause, because it wasn't only about Black people. He's talked about how it was poor white people. He talked about how it was brown people, Hispanic and other Latino people who were actually suffering from inequality and things of that nature. And so a group like the Young Patriots, which was an organization that was leftist, that was a mostly white group, Southerners from the Appalachia who had moved up to Chicago, and they could not get on their feet. And these individuals were just as vocal as the Panthers in terms of talking about their plight. But he got them to join in with the movement. He got also another group in with that movement, a Puerto Rican group that was involved. And I got a slide shortly coming up that will talk about that. But the thing about what happened to Fred Hampton is one of the most egregious acts since the 1960s by law enforcement in this country. Fred Hampton was actually killed in his bed. He was killed in his sleep. He was sleeping with his pregnant girlfriend at the time in December of 1969. There were other members also in the house that were injured. Mark Clark was killed during that raid. But this raid was not just one of these things that happened. This raid was planned. It was planned by law enforcement. It was a tactic that they used. They'd say that these individuals were dangerous, that they had guns, and that they had information that they were going to, cause problems and so on and so forth. And they actually went in, guns blazing. Fred Hampton was shot in the head, and his autopsy revealed that he was either sleeping unconscious or he was actually heavily sedated, one of the two. It was alleged that there was an informant, that the FBI had that infiltrated the group and had actually drugged Fred Hampton. And so the account that the police gave could not have been true in terms of saying that he fired upon them first and things of that nature. And we'll get a little bit more to that to come. But Fred Hampton brought all of these groups together, as you see. And this rainbow coalition, that he was starting, he became a very dangerous figure because he was an individual that was bringing a multi-ethnic and a multiracial coalition together to talk about the things that they had in common that would uplift, all of these groups and provide, some type of fair access to the services and the needs, that they had. And Fred Hampton, had to go. Fred Hampton had to go. It's always the Black Panthers that were, used as this political pawn that was said that there was this very dangerous militant group. But I mean, this was a group that was providing meals for children, that was trying to give job opportunities and job training for young men. This was a group that was a fair education, access to healthcare, and economic equality. These are the things that this group really stood for in terms of that. But what was happening in other places and what they were made out to be was something different, was something vastly different in the media and given to the white public, both locally in their cities and nationally, a different name. This is a very interesting photo. This is police officers, Chicago police officers, actually carrying the body of Fred Hampton. And to make a note of in particular, the officer in the back with his face, who appears to be smiling, for the camera. And that's very indicative, of this relationship of the police and the Black community. This guy shot dead in his bed while sleeping or unconscious or drugged with his pregnant girlfriend. And that story would make its way to light. But this guy, who was the Cook County State Attorney at the time, Edward Hanrahan, who actually led that raid, assisted by the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the FBI, he would eventually be charged, and other officers would actually be charged with. They would be indicted with crimes, and they were later acquitted by a jury. They never served any time. They were found not guilty of those crimes. But this guy had political aspirations of possibly even being mayor of Chicago one day, or even governor of Illinois or a senator. But that never came to fruition because he was forced out of office in Cook County, and he never regained public office again. So that's the price, that he paid for that. In terms of how the things were going in the country, more cities on fire, riots in Los Angeles and Detroit and Chicago and Newark, across the country in the 1960s. President Johnson was at his wit's end at what to do. And so what Johnson ended up putting together was something, this commission that was named after the governor of Illinois, who was in charge or placed in the lead of this group, a guy by the name of Otto Kerner. And Otto Kerner, the commission took on his name, and it was known as the Kurder Commission. And I just brought you one excerpt, of that. The formal name for that commission was the Advisory Commission on Civil Disorder. But there's a great book called Separate and Unequal, which is a direct line that came out of the Kerner report that said America was headed in two directions, one Black and one white. It was a very controversial report that never really made its way out to the mainstream public because of the things that it said and the stories that it told about what was really happening in the United States in the 1960s. And this is just one excerpt about the police. It said the police are not merely a spark factor. To some Negroes, police have come to symbolize white power, white racism, and white repression. And the fact is that many police do reflect and express these white attitudes. The atmosphere of hostility and cynicism is reinforced by a widespread belief among Negroes in the existence of police brutality and in a double standard of justice and protection, one for Negroes and one for whites. And that report has a number of these things in it. And, Johnson, he felt that he was doing a good job. The programs that he was trying to put in place, the 1964 Civil Rights Act that he signed, the 1965 Voters' Rights Act, some of the programs that were just not really taking effect. And he thought that he'd put this group together to go out, and provide him with a report, that would back up some of the things that he was doing. But, when they came back with the reality of what was actually going on, he wasn't too fond of that. And he knew how that was going to play, especially in an election year, on the other side, because politicians like Richard Nixon, who ran on this ideal of law and order, he demonized, the civil rights marchers and demonized, the Vietnam War protesters and things like that. And he made sure, day after day, that he would tie them to all the civil unrest and the cities burning and criminals and crimes and all of these things, that he was going to be the law and order president. And this had played before, with the white voter. And that's who he was after. That's who he was after, the white voter. Who can put him in office? He would demonize any group that it took. And the FBI was right in close behind him, because J. Edgar Hoover, had started this program that was is a counterintelligence program in which he identified the Black Panthers as the most dangerous group, in America, basically. That's what he was saying. And he was going to do everything in his power to ensure, that would stick. And so part of his tactics was to get people to infiltrate the groups, like I kind of mentioned with Fred Hampton. They get informants, infiltrate the group. They try to create division within the group. They try to bring about all types of propaganda and plant stories that were not true in the media, that the media would push. And these were the tactics that they've done. And some of you may have heard that, even, when Martin Luther King, 2 days before he was to accept the Nobel Prize, they sent him a letter, basically, indicating, hey, do away with yourself, or we're going to release, all of this information that we have on you about your infidelity and so on and so forth. These are the tactics that the Federal Bureau of Investigations were using. They were coaching police, local police departments to get involved also with these types, of tactics. Newspapers printing stories. You see these guys with guns in their hands. The Capitol is invaded. State police halt armed Negroes. I mean, a gun is power, Black Panther says. Think about these headlines and what they're sending out, to the white population who's already seen cities burning on television, but really not probably paying attention to all the underlying things that these individuals are saying. It wasn't about them being violent. It was saying that, wait, we want to protect ourselves from, white repression and police violence against us. We want the same resources for our community, better housing, job opportunities, education, healthcare, so on and so forth. If somebody just walked into this room and just heard me state that, they probably thought that I was talking about 2021, in many ethnic minority communities, around the United States. But this was the propaganda that was being pushed by politicians. This was the propaganda that was being pushed by the FBI, people being killed in their sleep. And so some of the things that we hear today, they're very similar to what we heard yesterday. Think about this statement. This is a statement that was given by John Ehrlichman. He died in 1999. And before he died, he gave this statement. He was Richard Nixon's chief domestic policy officer. So this is like Richard Nixon's right-hand man, and he says this, you want to know what this was really about? He was referring to Nixon's declaration on the war on drugs. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and Black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or Black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and Blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt their communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. He's basically given you what their playbook was. He was the domestic policy chief in which all of these things were rolling out of the White House. And so maybe it was his conscience that he had gotten to a point, he had gotten older, probably knew that he was going to pass soon, and he just wanted, to clear that conscience. But this is what he talked about. In 1976, the United States Senate, wrote a report. What had happened is that there was a group of individuals who broke into an FBI building and basically took all of their, well, not all of them, but many of their records that was related to this COINTELPRO program, this counterintelligence program, and what type of activities that they were up to. And then all that information was leaked to the media. In 1976, 5 years after the FBI's counterintelligence program was shut down, they shut it down in 71, the Senate committee concluded that the FBI's tactics were indisputably degrading to a free society and gave rise to the risk of death and often disregarded the personal rights and dignity of the victims. And so basically they were talking about all the wrongdoing that the FBI did. The FBI would release many more records, but it was heavily redacted. It was heavily covered up, so you actually couldn't read everything, that they were actually doing. In 1983, $1.8 million was awarded, to Mark Clark and Fred Hampton's survivors in a lawsuit that was filed against the city of Chicago in U.S. District Court, and so they basically settled that suit, awarded $1.8 million in the wrongful death of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. No one was ever prosecuted for that. No one was ever convicted for that. And $1.8 million, was a small a piece of consolation, I guess, for their deaths. But it also admits wrongdoing, in terms of awarding that money. Bobby Rush, who was a member of the Black Panther Party, just to show you some of the progress that was made. There he is with a young Fred Hampton, but Bobby Rush ended up being elected to local office and then as a United States congressman in 1992. And so there is a former Black Panther right now today, that's in Congress. Another thing about Bobby Rush that many people don't know is that in 2000, he was actually challenged for his seat in the primary. He was primaried as a Democrat, and so another Democrat ran against him, and that Democrat name was Barack Obama. Barack Obama ran against Bobby Rush for his congressional seat, and Bobby Rush beat Obama in that primary, who was then a state senator for Illinois. Of course, we all know where Barack Obama ended up, but that's just one of those tidbits. Today, how does this marry into what we see in some things in terms of the Black Lives Matters movement? Look, Black men, Black women, Black people, brown people, have still been the victims of police violence. Unarmed, no particular reason. As you see, gender, age, it doesn't matter. And so when people talk about this idea of Black Lives Mattering, they're coming with a lot of evidence, 400 years plus of evidence that something is terribly wrong. Progress has been made, but justice is still elusive. And so what can we do? And all these recognizable faces, faces that I wished we didn't recognize for other reasons, than for the reasons why they're on this screen. And so we see, another coalition coming together. The coalition that Fred Hampton envisioned, all people from all different backgrounds, talking about, Black Lives Matters. And by talking about Black Lives Matters, it's also representing, the fact that one impacts one group, impacts all groups, and impacts all people, from all walks of life. There's Beyonce at the Super Bowl several years ago, basically paying homage to the Black Panthers. We got star athletes. These are nothing new, kind of like in what I showed previously, the era of Muhammad Ali and Bill Russell and Lou Alcindor, who's known as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar today, and many other people who stood up, and even people and athletes now from around the world, and people from all backgrounds, all countries, coming out and standing against the oppressive nature of governments, not only in the United States, but governments across the world, in which, people of color's lives have been devalued, and the way that they live is unthinkable in the 21st century. Thank you, and I'll take your questions at this time. Are there any questions from anyone? The question is, what can be done today so that we don't repeat history? Well, Christopher, I think what can be done today is what you all have done that showed up here tonight. I think making yourself aware of what's out there and what's going on, what has been and what is, and then finding your voice. To try to figure out where does it fit, and because silence is complicit. If you're silent, then you might as well agree with what's going on, and so I think more education, people understanding the history of this and where this has come from, and a group like the Black Panthers, who were basically given this bad name, and all for the sake of trying to discredit them. And the U.S. government, has been guilty of that on a number of fronts. And if people really understood what that group stood for, sure, there was a couple of members who probably got themselves in a world of trouble, but that was not representative of the entirety of the movement. The movement was right. And so I think with people knowing that, it's just like, they try to discredit the Black Lives Matters movement, right? And so that was a piece of it. The Black Panther Party, there is something called a new Black Panther Party. Question that was asked to what organization did the Black Panther Party evolve? They didn't evolve really. People went in different directions. It was still intact, up and through the 80s, and then it finally came to an end, and basically just fizzed out because it was really no continuity. And I think that was the cause of it. It was too many pieces in too many places, people with different ideas and places to go. And so what ended up happening, is that, the mission was accomplished by the FBI, infiltrate the organization, cause a lot of strife within, use your propaganda machine to discredit their work and to discredit their voices. And with all of that misinformation, the group could never find traction. You killed off many of their leaders. Other leaders fell off by the wayside or just went away. And well, with that, it was discombobulated. Christine, there's a movie that's about to be released about Fred Hampton's life, and I can't think of the name of it, but I think it's going to be released on I want to say HBO Max. I think that's what it is. I can't think of the name of it, but certainly that's going to be a part. But I think a very good book that people should read. I kind of mentioned it tonight. It's not per se about the Black Panthers. There are several books that are out there, but it's coming from different people within the party. But I think a good book to read, honestly, is this Separate and Unequal book. This ideal that we talked about this 50 plus years ago, what we're going through now. The President of the United States had the information in his hand, and our Congress and our politicians knew exactly what was going on, and they failed to act. And so here we are over 5 decades later, dealing with the same issues, the same way. I mean, it's unthinkable how that has happened. I'm just trying to look at some of these other questions. What is the greatest legacy of the Black Panther Party? I think their greatest legacy is that they gave light to that anyone who has passion, who has a voice and is willing to speak it, can stand up, and say something. Yeah, somebody just put the movie in, Judas and the Black Messiah. That's the name of it. Yeah. So they just put that up. So thanks for putting that up. Let's see. Do you feel the media is doing the same thing to Black Lives Matter that they did to they did before, right? Allison, think about how Colin Kaepernick was treated. If you think about, they went to discredit him right away, and the media was involved in it. The NFL was involved in it. These large entities, they turned a guy in who was peacefully protesting, kneeling down. And when you kneel down, if you think about anything that's symbolic of people kneeling down, basically they're putting themselves at your mercy, bowing their head, showing no ill will towards you in protest. And they dismantled Colin Kaepernick. They dismantled him. And now Colin Kaepernick, in actual life, that the media, I think, with all the pressure from the public and the way that people came together, that the media was forced to tell that story the right way. And that was the public's voice that did that. There's a lot of people who found themselves on the wrong end of the Colin Kaepernick story, including the NFL, the NBA, and all those other large sports entities, but a lot of other people, who decided, that they were going to say that, this was, disrespectful to our country, so on and so forth. And so I think that the media, you have to be very careful, with that in terms of watching them, because, people get their information from the media, and they let the media, frame what their thoughts are. And social media does it too. It's unfortunate, but very few people probably understand how to really research these topics appropriately. Let's see, I'm just trying to look at, there was a few more questions. I know somebody asked, how do I feel about the FBI today? You have to take it on a case-by-case basis. You can't dismantle, the entire lot. Look, law enforcement in the United States and police in the United States is here to stay. It's not going to go anywhere. So I don't think that's the discussion to have. I think the better discussion to have is, how can we reimagine policing? How can we look at how officers are trained and educated and led in their agencies, and actually get to a philosophy that's more indicative of community service and public safety rather than policing. I say that because most people don't understand. Look, we've enjoyed the greatest crime drop that this country has ever seen in terms of its numbers since 1993. And that's almost 30 years ago. It's going on 28 plus years of the greatest violent crime drop that we've ever seen. But yet our police have become more militarized. They've taken on more of a warrior approach in many places. And that's not going to change unless the people keep up the pressure that they've done. Recently, I am aware of many law enforcement agencies who are really looking to change their philosophy, really looking to move towards this community-oriented policing approach to partner with their communities. It's not going to change overnight. It's going to, go day by day. The vast majority of the 18,000 plus law enforcement agencies in the United States, they're not experiencing the problems that some of them are. They're doing just fine. So it's not every law enforcement agency everywhere, but there are those agencies that seriously need to look at, reforming how they train and how they lead and how they educate and how they hire police officers and what relationship that they have with their community. Will America be an equitable country? I guess the best way, look, it's a work in progress. It's kind of like asking yourself, if you're married, do you think you're going to get divorced one day? Every day, this is a relationship, that we all share. It's a country, that we all love. And as Doc Rivers said, NBA basketball coach, he says, the terrible thing about, loving this country is sometimes this country doesn't love you back, but it doesn't stop you from loving it, which means that, look, we're here to stay, and we got to do what we can to ensure that we continue to bend towards justice, that this country leads up or move towards that creed in which that was based on. And so I don't think the question is, do I ever think America will be an equitable country? I think, do we have the resolve to keep moving in that direction is the better question. See, I'll take a couple more questions before we leave. Let's see. I think, is there anything else? I know a couple of people have put some things in the chat. I just encourage you all, I'll just leave you with this. I just encourage you all, like I tell my students, I say, I just drop these little crumbs along the way. I've just given you bits and pieces about the Black Panther Party, here tonight. But I think is, again, where's your resolve to want to know more and to do the work and to do the research and then to take that and use that towards a purpose, of moving this country towards a more equitable and fair nation. That's the way that I see it. And I appreciate everybody, coming out tonight and listening. And I hope and trust that this information will leave you all well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Theodore Darden, for your wonderful information on the Black Panther Party. For those who are interested, this program will be available through our social media website soon. Once again, Dr. Theodore Darden, thank you so much for your expertise and your time this evening. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.